Hello, my name is Sheetal Bapna and I'm pursuing BBA Honours from Ahmedabad University. My enrollment number is AU2210330. Today I'll be reading out the story We Should All Be Feminists. Okoloma was one of my greatest childhood friends. He lived on my street and looked after me like a big brother. If I liked a boy, I would ask Okoloma's opinion. Okoloma was funny and intelligent and wore cowboy boots that were pointy at the tips. In December 2005, in a plane crash in southern Nigeria, Okoloma died. It is still hard for me to put into words how I felt. Okoloma was a person I could argue with, laugh with, and truly talk to. He was also the first person to call me a feminist. I was about 14. We were in his house arguing, both of us bristly with half baked knowledge from the books we had read. I don't remember what this particular argument was about, but I remember that as I argued, Okoloma looked at me and said, "You know, you are a feminist." It was not a compliment. I could tell from his tone. The same tone with which a person would say, "You are a supporter of terrorism." I did not know exactly what this word feminist meant, and I did not want Okoloma to know that I didn't know. So I brushed it aside and continued to argue. The first thing I planned to do when I got home was look up the word in the dictionary. Now, fast forward to some years later. In 2003, I wrote a novel called Purple Hibiscus about a man who, among other things, beats his wife and whose story doesn't end too well. While I was promoting the novel in Nigeria, a journalist, a nice, well meaning man, told me he wanted to advise me. Nigerians, as you might know, are very quick to give unsolicited advice. He told me that people were saying my novel was feminist, and his advice to me, he was shaking his head sadly as he spoke, was that I should never call myself a feminist. Since feminists are women who are unhappy because they cannot find husbands. So I decided to call myself a happy feminist. Then an academic, a Nigerian woman, told me that feminism was not our culture, that feminism was un African, and I was only calling myself a feminist because I had been influenced by Western books, which amused me because much of my early reading was decidedly unfeminist. I must have read every single Mills and Boone romance published before I was 16. And each time I try to read those books called classic feminist texts, I get bored and I struggle to finish them. Anyway, since feminism was un African, I decided I would now call myself a happy African feminist. Then a dear friend told me that calling myself a feminist meant that I hated men. So I decided I would now be a happy African feminist who does not hate men. At some point, I was a happy African feminist who does not hate men and who likes to wear lip gloss and high heels for herself and not for men. Of course, much of this was tongue in cheek, but what it shows is how that word feminist is so heavy with baggage, negative baggage. You hate men, you hate bras, you hate African culture. You think women should always be in charge, you don't wear makeup, you don't shave, you are always angry, you don't have a sense of humor, you don't use deodorant. Now, here's a story from my childhood. When I was in primary school in Suka, a university town in southeastern Nigeria, my teacher said at the beginning of term that she would give the class a test and whoever got the highest score would be the class monitor. Class monitor was a big deal. If you were a class monitor, you would write down the names of noisemakers each day, which was heady enough power on its own. But my teacher would also give you a cane to hold in your hand while you walked around and patrolled the class for noisemakers. Of course, you were not allowed to actually use the cane, but it was an exciting prospect for the 9-year-old me. I very much wanted to be class monitor and I got the highest score on the test. Then, to my surprise, my teacher said the monitor had to be a boy. She had forgotten to make that clear earlier. She assumed it was obvious. A boy had the second highest score on the test and he would be monitor. What was even more interesting is that this boy was a sweet, gentle soul who had no interest in patrolling the class with a stick, while I was full of ambition to do so. But I was a female and he was male, and he became monitor. I've never forgotten that incident. If we do something over and over again, it becomes normal. If we see the same thing over and over again, it becomes normal. If only boys are made class monitor, then at some point we will all think, even if unconsciously, that the class monitor has to be a boy. If we keep seeing only men as heads of corporations, it starts to seem natural that only men should be heads of corporation. I often make the mistake of thinking that something is obvious to me is just as obvious to everyone else. Take my dear friend Lewis, who is a brilliant progressive man. We would have conversations and he would tell me, I don't see what you mean by things being different and harder for women. Maybe it was so in the past, but not now. Everything is fine now for women. I didn't understand how Lewis could not see what seemed so evident. I love being back home in Nigeria and spend much of my time there in Lagos, the largest city and commercial hub of the country. Sometimes in the evening, when the heat goes down and the city has a slower pace, I go out with friends and family to restaurants or cafes. On one of those evenings, Louis and I were out with friends. There is a wonderful fixture in Lagos, a sprinkling of energetic young men who hang around outside certain establishments and very dramatically help you park your car. Lagos is a metropolis of almost 20 million people with more energy than London, more entrepreneurial spirit than New York, and so people come up with all sorts of ways to make a living. As in most big cities, finding parking in the evenings can be difficult, so these young men make a business out of finding spots, and even when there are spots available, of guiding you into yours with much gesticulating and promising to look after your car until you get back. I was impressed with the particular theatrics of the man who found us a parking spot that evening, and so, as we were leaving, I decided to give him a tip. I opened my bag, put my hand inside my bag to get my money, and I gave it to the man. And he, this man who was happy and grateful, took the money from me and then looked across at Louis and said, Thank you, sir. Louis looked at me surprised and asked, Why is he thanking me? I didn't give him the money. Then I saw realization dawn on Louis's face. The man believed that whatever money I had ultimately came from Louis because Louis is a man. Men and women are different. We have different hormones and different sexual organs and different biological abilities. Women can have babies, men cannot. Men have more testosterone and are in general physically stronger than women. There are slightly more women than men in the world. 52% of the world's population is female, but most of the positions of power and prestige are well occupied by men. The late Kenyan Nobel Peace Laureate Wangari Maathai put it simply and well when she said, The higher you go, the fewer women there are. In the recent US elections, we kept hearing of the Lilly Ledbetter law, and if we go beyond that nicely alliterative name, it was really about this. In the US, a man and a woman are doing the same job with the same qualifications, and the man is paid more because he's a man. So, in a literal way, men rule the world. This made sense 1,000 years ago because human beings lived then in a world in which physical strength was the most important attribute for survival. The physically stronger person was more likely to lead, and men in general are physically stronger. There are, of course, many exceptions. Today, we live in a vastly different world. The person more qualified to lead is not the physically stronger person, it is the more intelligent, the more knowledgeable, the more creative, more innovative. And there are no hormones for those attributes. A man is as likely as a woman to be intelligent, innovative, creative. We have evolved, but our ideas of gender have not evolved very much. Not long ago, I walked into the lobby of one of the best Nigerian hotels, and a guard at the entrance stopped me and asked me annoying questions. What was the name and room number of the person I was visiting? Did I know this person? Could I prove that I was a hotel guest by showing him my key card? Because the automatic assumption is that a Nigerian female walking into a hotel alone is a sex worker, because a Nigerian female alone cannot possibly be a guest paying for her own room. A man who walks into the same hotel is not harassed. The assumption is that he is there for something legitimate. Why, by the way, do these hotels not focus on the demand for sex workers instead of on the ostensible supply? In Lagos, I cannot go alone into many reputable clubs and bars. They just don't let you if you are a woman alone. You must be occupied by a man. And so, I have male friends who arrive at clubs and end up going in their arms linked with those of a complete stranger because that complete stranger, a woman out on her own, had no choice but to ask for help to get into the club. Each time I walk into a Nigerian restaurant with a man, the waiter greets the man and ignores me. The waiters are products of a society that has taught them that men are more important than women, and I know that they don't intend harm, but it is one thing to know something intellectually and quite another to feel it emotionally. Each time they ignore me, I feel invisible. I feel upset. I want to tell them that I am just as human as the man, just as worthy of acknowledgement. These are little things, but sometimes it is the little things that sting the most. Not long ago, I wrote an article about being young and female in Lagos, and an acquaintance told me that it was an angry article and I should not have made it so angry. But I was unapologetic. Of course, it was angry. Gender, as it functions today, is a grave injustice. I'm angry. We should all be angry. Anger has a long history of bringing about positive change. But I'm also helpful because I believe deeply in the ability of human beings to remake themselves for the better. But back to anger, I heard the caution in the acquaintance's tone, and I knew that the comment was as much about the article as it was about my character. Anger, the tone said, is particularly not good for a woman. If you are a woman, you are not supposed to express anger because it is threatening. I have a friend, an American woman, who took over a managerial position from a man. Her predecessor had been considered a tough go getter. He was blunt and hard changing and was particularly strict about the signing of timesheets. She took on her new job and imagined herself equally tough but perhaps a little kinder than him. He didn't always realize that people had families, she said, and she did. Only weeks into her new job, she disciplined an employee about a forgery on a timesheet, just as her predecessor would have done. The employee then complained to top management about her style. She was aggressive and difficult to work with, the employee said. Other employees agreed. One said they had expected that she would bring a women's touch to her job, but she hadn't. It didn't occur to any of them that she was doing the same thing for which a man had been praised. I have another friend, also an American woman, who has a high paying job in advertising. She's one of two women in her team. Once at a meeting, she said she had felt slightly by her boss, who had ignored her comments and then praised something similar when it came from a man. She wanted to speak up to challenge her boss, but she didn't listen.